For our final major world religion that we're going to discuss in this class, we move further east from China to the islands of Japan. And we talk about the uh, traditional traditional Japanese religious tradition called Shinto. Shinto is a traditional religion, and probably in many ways it's similar to what the Chinese traditional religion was before the advent of Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. And Buddhism, of course, made its way to Japan as well. Zen Buddhism, which is well known in the United States, is a form of Japanese Buddhism. But Shinto long predates the advent of Buddhism to Japan or any other religious traditions that we know of. Central to Shinto is the belief in the kami. This is a plural word. It can be singular or plural. Kami are spirits of natural phenomena and revered ancestors who are worshipped in Shinto. Kami are often associated with divine forces in nature, like the sun, the rain, the sea, the wind. Other kami are identified with specific locations or objects, like a waterfall or a mountain, animals, trees. Kami are part of nature, and so they contain both positive and negative characteristics. The earliest kami in Shinto were probably spirits associated with the earth and were important for hunter-gatherer societies in Japan. After the domestication of rice, many kami came to be seen as protectors of the crops, gods of the sun and the rain, and so forth. Some kami are associated with diseases of various sorts. Others are believed to punish those who did not honor the kami. And so there are kami for pretty much everything. Some historical individuals, such as departed emperors, are worshipped as kami after death. An 18th century Shinto scholar said that a kami is anything that can fill people with awe and wonder. That takes us back to probably our very first class period, one of the first videos. We talked about the idea of mysterium tremendum et fascinans, anything that fills people with awe, that's tremendum, and wonder, fascinans. And so we've kind of come full circle here. Kami are believed to live both in man-made Shinto shrines and in places of natural beauty, such as an old tree or a mountain. All right, now I'm going to talk about some aspects of Shinto. There's a feast called the Daijosai. This is the Great Food Festival. It is the first Shinto harvest festival celebrated by a new emperor. And since Japan got a new emperor in 2019, or maybe it was late 2018, I don't remember, the new emperor, Naruhito, celebrated the Daijosai Great Food Festival in 2019. And it's a harvest festival. In fact, there's a harvest festival called Ninamesai that is celebrated every year by the emperor, because the emperor is also considered to be the chief priest of Shinto. But the very first celebration of the harvest festival by the emperor has special significance, and it gets its own name, the Daijosai. And so this is what happens in the Daijosai. After taking a ritual bath and putting on a white silk robe, the emperor meditates until it's time to begin the festival. Then the emperor walks barefoot with attendants rolling out a mat before him so his feet never touch the ground. He enters a ritual building called the Yukiden, where he waits in a small room while ancient music is played. He then enters the ritual hall, seats himself on a mat, and eats offerings of rice and sake, which is, of course, rice wine. The same offerings of rice and sake are on another mat for the kami, and so they are left there. After the emperor is done, he leaves the Yukiden, he washes again, then he enters an almost identical building called the Tsukiden, and he repeats the same rituals. Each of these celebrations lasts about 3 hours. And so this is a Daijosai, the great food festival, which is very, very important in Shinto. There are between 80,000 and 100,000 Shinto shrines in Japan. These are man-made, human-built shrines, from very large to very small. The entrance to these Shinto shrines is marked by a ceremonial gate called a torii, spelled T-O-R-I-I. Okay? A torii marks the entrance to the shrine, and ceremonies that are held at the shrines involve food offerings to the kami, laid out slowly and elaborately, followed by chanted prayers, thanking the shrine's kami for blessings of the past year or asking for blessings for the upcoming year. Then, after the ritual is over, the food is removed to be eaten later by the priests and their families. The most sacred part of the Shinto shrine is called the Honden. This is the innermost sanctuary. Think of the Holy of Holies within Judaism, for example. Ancient Israel, anyways. The Honden is the inner sanctuary where the kami is believed to dwell, and the kami itself is represented in the room by something called Shintai. So the kami isn't something that you could see or touch or feel, but the Shintai is a physical object that represents the kami. You might think of an icon in an Orthodox church, an Eastern Orthodox church, that represents but is not one of the saints or the Virgin Mary or Jesus or something like that. It's not Jesus, but it represents Jesus. So in the same way, the Shintai represents the kami. The Shintai may be a sword, a mirror, a stone, even a piece of paper with the kami's name written on it. It could be pretty much anything. And it's taken and covered with many layers of decorative cloth. And once it's covered, it's never opened again. And the actual object inside, it may be that people haven't seen it in generations and hundreds of years. And they may have even forgotten exactly what the object inside is. But this is illustrative of an important principle in Japanese culture, which is that which is most sacred is hidden. That which is most sacred is hidden. It lends mystery to the object, and the Honden is not entered except on special feast days, much as the Holy of Holies in the ancient Israelite temple wasn't entered except on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And so, similarly, the Honden is only entered by the priests on special feast days where the priests will go in and offer sacrifices before the Shintai. The shrine festival, any shrine festival, has 4 basic stages of ritual. First is purification. So the shrine and the grounds are ritually swept clean. Second is presentation, a solemn ceremony bringing offerings to the kami. Third is prayer. This is a reading of norito, or prayer. And fourth is participation. All worshipers bring evergreen branches and present them on an offering table. They sip a little bit of sake, the rice wine, and then they enjoy themselves in a kind of a carnival within the shrine precincts. The greatest Shinto shrine is the Grand Shrine of Ise, which is located near the Pacific Ocean, far from any cities. Like all Shinto shrines, this shrine is made of wood, entirely of wood, with no nails or any other metal except for decorative gold. There are actually 2 separate shrines about 5 miles apart that make up this Grand Shrine of Ise. One of these shrines is dedicated to Amaterasu, the sun goddess, who is considered to be the ancestor of the imperial line, the line of emperors, Japanese emperors, the chrysanthemum throne, as it's also called. And there's a shrine dedicated to Toyouke, the ancient food goddess. Most important festivals at this shrine are harvest festivals, and each shrine is rebuilt from scratch every 20 years. I mean, remember, it's made completely of wood. It's right next to the ocean. There's a lot of salt water and rain and the humidity in the air, and so the thing falls apart and has to be rebuilt from scratch every 20 years. The emperor travels to the great shrine of Ise to report to the kami the important events of the nation. So in the year 1945, the Emperor Hirohito traveled to the shrine to report Japan's defeat in World War II. All right, now let's talk a little bit more about Shinto in general. What are some of the features of Shinto? There are 5 main features of Shinto that I'm going to talk about: purity versus impurity, traditionalism, the importance of matsuri, or shrine festivals, and practical forms of religious expression, the sociological role of religion in Shinto, and polytheism and theoretical expression in Shinto. We'll start with purity versus impurity. Way back at the beginning of this class, we talked about the notions of sacred time and sacred space, and we have seen how they've been important in the various religious traditions we've looked at. They are particularly important in Shinto, both sacred time and sacred space. The torii, the gate that marks the boundary into the entrance into the Shinto shrine, marks the boundary between the outer world of pollution and the inner world of purity associated with the kami. The matsuri are shrine festivals. The matsuri mark festival days as different from ordinary time. So sacred space beyond the torii gate and sacred time, the matsuri. The simplicity of Shinto shrines reflects proximity to nature and its own national or natural purity, which is also associated with the kami. Remember that the original kami were associated with natural objects: hills, mountains, trees, rivers, springs, so forth. And so the natural realm is considered in Shinto to be more pure than the human realm. So the tops of hills and mountains are were particularly important as the dwelling places of the gods in ancient times. And they still continue to be important today. Things like blood, sickness, and death are especially impure, and for this reason, and I think this is kind of funny, but it's interesting, for this reason, weddings and birth celebrations are done in Shinto shrines, while funerals are generally held in Buddhist shrines, because death is considered to be impure, and Shinto don't want to associate death. They can't bring someone who's dead inside a Shinto shrine because it's impure. Okay, the second feature of Shinto is traditionalism. Doing things as they've always been done is important in Shinto. Confucius, I think, would agree with this, the importance of ritual. As in larger Japanese culture in general, traditionalism is important. The fires to cook the rice offerings in the shrines are started with a fire drill. This is a piece of wood here, a piece of wood here, a string, and you go back and forth, and the little piece of wood in the center uses friction to start the fire rather than using matches or a lighter or a blowtorch or something like that. So they use traditional means to light the fires for their offerings. They also clap twice prior to offering a prayer to the kami. Now, that's not to say that traditions can never change. Dealings with the kami follow traditions. However, the high priest of Shinto or the emperor can say that certain things need to be changed if they deem that the kami have spoken to them and told them that it needs to be changed. This happens very rarely, as you can imagine. Traditions can also change in light of revelations from the kami to recognize Shinto religious authorities, but again, these are few and far between. Practical forms of religious expression. The belief in Shinto doctrines is not as important as performing rites correctly. So there are Shinto beliefs, but it doesn't matter that much that you believe the beliefs, that you follow the beliefs, rather that you perform the rituals correctly. The Matsuri festivals and other rituals. So pilgrimages to shrines are especially important. Shrines that have been important to your family over generations, you should make a pilgrimage. That's your duty to do that within Shinto. Um, Sacred mountains like Mount Fuji in Japan these are important pilgrimage destinations as well. There are Shinto shrines along the path to the top of Mount Fuji, but the top of Mount Fuji all by itself is also considered to be a Shinto shrine. It's a place where the kami dwell. The sociological role of Shinto is another of the features of Shinto. Participation in Shinto worship is a manifestation of one's identity as a member of the community, member of your family, a business, a town, your nation. You're a member of all those things as a Japanese citizen. Therefore, you need to participate in these Shinto rituals. This is most evident at a local level where Shinto priests are regularly summoned to bless the laying of a new cornerstone for the foundation of a new building, for example. And finally, polytheism and the theoretical expression of Shinto, unlike at least some versions of Hinduism and Taoism, both Hinduism and Taoism have many gods, but in some expressions of those two religious traditions, these gods are seen as expressions of a single underlying reality. Shinto, by contrast, stresses the distinctives and local character of individual kami. They don't represent an underlying reality at all. They have their own distinctives. And Shinto is very much polytheistic. Polytheism requires a mythology, a story, a sacred story, or stories. And Shinto mythology is expressed in two books. One book is called the Kojiki, Chronicles of Ancient Times. It was written in the year 712 CE. And the Nihongi, Chronicles of Japan, written in the year 720. Both were written about the time when Buddhism was rising in influence in Japan, and they were probably written to preserve the pre-Buddhist narrative of the country and to legitimate the imperial rule. The creation myth in Shinto speaks of two primeval parents, Izanagi and Izanami, who descended from the high plains of heaven on a floating bridge, the floating bridge of heaven, and they created the earth, as well as the islands of Japan, the various kami of the mountains, oceans, rivers, trees, and also rice. Izanami gave birth to the fire god and burned herself, so had to descend to the underworld, the land of the dead. Izanagi went looking for her, but she was already decayed, so he returned to the earth. The sun goddess Amaterasu emerged from his left eye, the moon god Tsukiyomi from his right eye, and the wind god Susanoo from his nose. Susanoo, as it turned out, was a troublemaker, and before too long, Amaterasu had hidden herself in the cave, this sun goddess, had hidden herself in a cave, refusing to come out because of Susanoo's shenanigans. Eventually, she was coaxed out by using a mirror so she could see her brilliance. And also, she was coaxed out by the call of a rooster, which is her sacred bird. I want to point out that Susanoo, the troublemaker or trickster god, you have trickster gods in many traditional religious cultures, and many African religious cultures, many Native American, North American Native religions have a trickster god as well. And so, in that sense, Susanoo is very much in keeping with some of these very ancient religious traditions. In the late 19th and early 20th century, Japan was emerging from a period when it was ruled by what's called the Tokugawa shogunate, the shoguns, right? And it was a military dictatorship, feudal Japanese military government that ruled from 1600 to 1868. And so, as the shogunate, when the shogunate was overthrown, this was called the Meiji Restoration, after the Emperor Meiji and the Empress Shokin. And one of the things they did was they decided they wanted to modernize Japan. And one of the things that they did was they reintroduced many of these Shinto rituals that had been disregarded by the shogunate for the previous almost 3 centuries. And so Japan, Shinto has been seen as sort of the official religion of Japan ever since. Now, you can be a follower of Shinto and also practice Buddhism or Christianity or whatever else you might want to practice, at least as far as Shinto is concerned, maybe not as far as the other religions are concerned. But Shinto is very much part and parcel of what it means to be a traditional Japanese citizen. Finally, one very interesting fact about Shinto, in contrast to most of the religious traditions that we've talked about so far, even though Shinto has priests, unlike some of the religious traditions like Sikhism, for example, there is no scripture in Shinto. I haven't said anything about religious writings. I did talk about Shinto mythology being contained in 2 books, the Chronicles of Ancient Times and the Chronicles of Japan, but these are not considered to be sacred texts. They're just considered to be important historical texts that preserve some of the early stories and the traditions of Japan. So there is no scripture in Shinto.